joined by Senators Durbin, Stabenow, and Duckworth. Glad to be joined by them. So, events since Donald Trump lost the 2020 election have made it clear there's an epic battle happening within the Republican Party. Unfortunately, too much of the Republican Party has already been taken over by MAGA Republicans. And how extreme MAGA Republicans have become was on full display this week at CPAC. CPAC, the MAGA Republican event of the year, amazingly had Viktor Orban, one of the leading autocrats, one of the leading anti-democratic people in Europe, who has whittled away democracy in Hungary, as their lead speaker. Is that incredible? To praise Orban, who fights democracy at every turn, and make him their speaker? That shows you where this Republican Party is headed under MAGA Republican domination. The MAGA Republicans, who claim to be defending liberty and freedom, align themselves with elements that are advancing an authoritarian agenda. It's sickening to see that 2 weeks after the shooting in Buffalo, Republicans as prominent as Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson spoke at the same event as one of Europe's most prominent white nationalists and authoritarians. It's scary. It's a strange shift for one of America's two parties and should send a chill down the spine of every American. Democrats are relentlessly and strongly highlighting the differences between our vision for a brighter future for America and the MAGA Republican dystopian, authoritarian view. MAGA Republicans are now dominating their party, and Republicans in the Senate as well, and they're moving the party away from things it has often stood for in the past. The contrast becomes clearer and clearer and clearer every day. For instance, Democrats want to codify a woman's freedom to make decisions about her own body into federal law, but MAGA Republicans want to take away women's rights. They're pushing a national abortion ban. They want to jail women and doctors for carrying out abortions. They even push bans with no exception for rape and incest. Democrats are pushing to repeal Trump's tax law giveaways to the wealthiest few and the big corporations. Senator Scott and MAGA Republicans want to raise taxes on working families by an average of $1,000, while cheering inflation as a political gold mine. That's what Scott said. Inflation is a political gold mine. Can you imagine? MAGA Republicans and Fox News hosts promote deranged conspiracy theories like replacement theory to gin up ratings and turn out voters. The MAGA Republican agenda, in short, is totally out of step with the values of mainstream Americans and with the grand history of America. It would be a dramatic turn away from our march towards freedom and prosperity. I know not all Republicans embrace the views of MAGA Republicans. I know many of them support women's rights or embrace diversity and certainly reject theories like replacement theory. Those Republicans who are not MAGA in the Senate and in the country need to speak up. I urge Republicans in the Senate and in the country to repudiate the MAGA wing taking over the GOP, but all too often, and you've seen it at this podium, there's silence. We can do that this week, when the Senate will have a chance to take a stand against extremism by voting to begin debate, simply begin debate, that's all the vote will be, on the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. It's a simple question. Should the Senate consider a bill to crack down on domestic terrorism and extremism? Yes or no? We need to take the first step to fight domestic terrorism. We'll see where everyone falls. I know when confronted with the contrast between what Democrats stand for and what MAGA Republicans stand for, the American people are squarely on our side. So we're going to keep up the fight. We're going to keep highlighting the contrast between the two parties. The differences could not be clearer. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chuck. The mass shooting in Buffalo just a few weeks ago was a tragic reminder of the ongoing and persistent threat posed by violent white supremacism and other far-right extremism. I first held a hearing on this subject 10 years ago, in 2012, after the massacre by a white supremacist at a Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. In March of last year, the first official hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I chaired, the first official hearing was with the Capitol FBI Director Christopher Wray. He testified to the Judiciary Committee about the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and that the threat of domestic terrorism, in the words of FBI Director Wray, was, quote, metastasizing, close quote, throughout the country. The Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act responds to this threat. It would ensure the Department of Justice, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security work together to track and respond to this threat. It would establish offices to combat domestic terrorism at these departments, and it would require these offices to regularly assess domestic terrorism threats in the United States and to focus on the most significant threat. Crucially, these agencies would also provide training and resources to assist state, local, and tribal law enforcement in addressing the threat of domestic terrorism. This bill would also establish an interagency task force to combat white supremacist infiltration of the uniformed services and federal and state and local law enforcement ranks. In the last Congress, the House passed this Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act by a voice vote. However, the House Republican leadership chose to whip against the bill last week, leading to a largely party-line vote on this issue. Even the House Republican co-sponsors of the bill, who joined me in a press conference last year to introduce the bill, voted against their own bill. In order to justify the change of position, some Republicans are falsely claiming the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act would lead to spying on American citizens. One even claimed it was the Patriot Act of American citizens. Think of that for a moment. The director of the FBI tells us domestic terrorism is metastasizing like a cancer across the United States. He points out white supremacists, white nationalists as an example of this extremism. We put in a bill to monitor the investigations and prosecution of domestic terrorism, and the Republicans oppose it. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine how they would scream that Democrats were soft on terrorism, and yet they're doing exactly the same things themselves? It is hard to believe, as Chuck has mentioned, the first president of the Republican Party was Abraham Lincoln from our state of Illinois. He wouldn't recognize the Republicans of today, and he certainly wouldn't recognize the MAGA Republicans and their warped values. It is false to claim this is a Patriot Act. The people who are engaged in terrorism across this country are not patriots and never should be characterized as such. The reality is this bill is just the same one that passed the House in 2019 with very few changes, and it does not provide any new law enforcement authority, creates no new crimes. In fact, this act is a modest bill that simply ensures that we collect the data. I'll make one last point. Why are we making this distinction to collect data on domestic terrorism if it involves white supremacy? Because under the Trump administration, they eliminated the category at the FBI. They didn't want the information coming forward because they knew the reality of the people who descended on this building on January 6th of last year. They knew the reality of the white supremacists that we're seeing manifest their hate in Buffalo, New York, and so many other places. This bill will help keep America safe. How many more cities must face the tragedy and pain of Oak Creek, Wisconsin, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, California, El Paso, Buffalo? I hope that these communities and all communities across this nation will join us in a domestic effort to stop terrorism in the United States. Let's be honest about who the terrorists are, and let's make sure that they don't harm another American family.
Senator Stabenow. Hello.
Well, good afternoon. The difference between Republicans and Democrats is that Democrats think our best days are ahead of us, and Republicans think they are behind us, 50 years, or maybe even 100 years behind us. Republicans continue to protect the profits of oil companies that have been polluting our world for 100 years and accelerating the climate crisis. Democrats are leading efforts to create a new clean energy future and the jobs that go with that future. MAGA Republicans want to take us back over 50 years in voting, taking away people's freedom to vote in an effort to consolidate MAGA Republican power. Democrats understand that our democracy means, in our country, every American has the freedom to vote. And they're eager to turn back the clock 50 years on our ability as women to make our own reproductive decisions. On Wednesday, our DPCC is hosting a virtual roundtable on the future of women's reproductive freedom in the states. I hope you'll join us. We'll hear from the governor of Michigan, the Wisconsin Attorney General, and state representatives from Missouri and from Oklahoma. They're going to share with us what's happening for women in their states and how their laws will kick in, whether it's 1849 in Wisconsin or 1931 in Michigan. And there are actually 26 states that will have state laws kick in, and 17 of those do not allow exemptions for rape and incest. So they're going to talk about what that means to the people of their states. Frankly, Republicans are declaring war on progress, and MAGA Republicans want to take us backwards, 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 in their mind to somehow consolidate power for them. And they're willing to support extremism and violence and whatever it takes as MAGA Republicans. So we are not going to turn back the clock as Democrats. We're going to make sure we keep moving forward on behalf of the American people.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. I want to emphasize one of the topics that Senator Stabenow has brought up. Even though it is disheartening, we still have to have this debate about whether women should be in control of their own bodies. I am proud to be here with my colleagues to reiterate that Democrats are not going to give up when it comes to protecting reproductive rights, no matter what. Despite previously repeatedly affirming a person's constitutional right to make their own reproductive decisions, the Supreme Court appears to be on the verge of taking away Americans' rights for the first time in history. Overturning Roe won't just put women's rights at stake, it would put so many other rights at risk too, including the rights of families that are trying to have children. You know, laws like the recently passed Oklahoma bill that does not provide, as far as I can tell, an exemption for IVF procedures, they define a fertilized egg as the beginning of life, which means that doctors who, for example, take 3 fertilized eggs and call 1 or 2 that is not viable to implant the single viable egg in me could be sued under these laws and could be convicted of performing an abortion. This is wrong. Because of IVF, I got to experience the joys of motherhood. But with the systematic decades of work that MAGA Republicans have done to undermine Roe and to take away women's autonomy over their own bodies right now, a woman's right to access basic necessary health care is on the line. And I've heard so many of my Republican colleagues say they aren't going to outlaw fertility treatments. Well, the Association of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine last week sent a very urgent bulletin that says, and I quote, "Measures designed to restrict abortion could also curtail access to family-building treatments on which our patients rely to build their families, and that," unquote, "and that could put these doctors who perform these procedures at legal risk." Illinois is already a state where women will drive 1,000 miles to come to us for reproductive choice, and we welcome them. We welcome women who come as far as Texas to Illinois to either obtain an abortion or get whatever help they need. They have to do that because some politicians, especially MAGA Republicans, are putting women, especially women of color, women who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, in jeopardy by working to outlaw abortion because they're the ones who will lose access first. So let's be clear. Shame on people who think it is beyond the pale to regulate firearms. Shame on my colleagues who won't vote to end the gun show loophole, but find it totally fine to regulate our uteruses. I refuse to let my daughters grow up in a world with fewer rights than I had, and I won't stop working until we codify Roe v. Wade into law and ensure reproductive freedoms are protected for all women. I am proud that Democrats, and it is Democrats, not MAGA Republicans, who are standing up for women. And I'll hand it now back to Senator Schumer.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth, for, as usual, your eloquent and heartfelt words. Yes.
Senator Schumer, what happened to the urgency of passing a COVID aid package, and when are you going to bring one to the floor?
There is still an urgency to pass a COVID relief package. It's very, very much needed. We hope now with the new court ruling, Republicans will not stand in the way. And as I said before, we're waiting for the House to send us something. Yes.
Leader, just with respect to the White House is poised to put forth an executive order tomorrow on police reform, the second anniversary of George Floyd's death. Some say even with that, congressional action is still required. Do you think this issue will ever be revisited in this chamber?
Yeah, Senator Durbin has been working on that issue. So has Senator Booker. And it's very, very important. We're not giving up on it. Do you want to say something? No? Okay. Yes.
This question is actually for Senator Durbin here for just a second, please, if you don't mind.
I mind. No.
Yield. The Archbishop of San Francisco said that he would not take communion or give Speaker Pelosi communion. However, you have had the same issue with the Archdiocese in Springfield. What do you think about the decision by the Archbishop in San Francisco and kind of understanding what Speaker Pelosi is going through and how this has affected you as well?
Well, it's very personal to Speaker Pelosi as it is to me. The decision of the Catholic bishops and the treatment of pro-choice Catholics is different in diocese by diocese. As a policy, they were poised to act for the entire nation, but then withdrew that decision. I still believe that the authorities in the church believe that we have issues that can only be decided by our own conscience and not by some bishop's conscience.
Thank you.
Leader Schumer. The Senate Judiciary Committee recently passed a bill known as NOPEC that potentially could open up the OPEC cartel to U.S. antitrust laws. Since then, the oil minister of OPEC countries have pushed back. The UAE oil minister said it would shoot up oil prices to $300 a barrel. The Saudi oil minister said it would agitate the market. What do you think about their...
Well, look, OPEC is a monopoly, and for years, long before the Ukraine war, it has exacted a very high price from Americans, and I'd seriously explore anything that could be done to undo the harm that that monopoly does. Yes.
Codifying Roe is a major important issue for Democrats. What more can the Democratic Party do to get this?
Well, look, we are having all kinds of different approaches that we are going forward with. Senator Stabenow this week will be talking about some of those issues, and we're going to continue. This is a vital thing. We believe we are on the side of the American people, and we do not want to backtrack. Anything that backtracks on Roe is a non-starter for us. Yes.
Back to COVID relief. I know you're waiting on the House there back until June 7th. So I wonder, does that mean that nothing's coming before then? And also, what makes you hopeful?
As I said, well, let's hope this is so important that our Republican friends should not put anything in the way of it. We now have a decision on Title 42. I don't agree with that decision, but it's there. They should now go forward and say, let us move forward on COVID without amendments that would attempt to block it.
They're not saying that. They're not saying that.
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned exceptions for rape, incest, and the like, some other purposes, abortions. Would you consider putting something more narrow on the floor addressing?
As I said, we are not going to backtrack. We are not going to support any kind of bill that will backtrack on the needs to protect a woman's right to choose, plain and simple. Last one.
Senators left last week without taking up that $28 million baby formula FDA supplemental. Where do negotiations stand on that? How can
Yeah, our Republicans may not be letting us go forward, but if they don't, we're going to try to get unanimous consent. We have to show some accountability here. And when Republicans block something as simple as that, and really, in terms of its cost, not very onerous, they should be held accountable for it. We believe this should pass, and it should pass by UC. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.